This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Oh my goodness. All right, guys, we're on. All right. Post-market monitoring and incident reporting. So we're pretty much almost near the end. This is second to last, I think, in our big circle. Yes, it is. So we've skipped advertising and distribution because we're going to talk about that one in the very last lecture. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not really that important unless you want to get paid. So we're finally at the post-market studies and surveillance part of this diagram. And we're going to talk about the urogenital mesh. Now, I know some of you guys might be familiar with this story, but it's been pretty big for the last 18 months in Australia. So, urogenital mesh is, and the urogenital devices that they're talking about here, is basically like a little sling net that they use to repair vaginal hernias, vaginal prolapse, pelvic floor muscle issues, any sort of pelvic floor surgery. They use that. They used to just use the muscles and they used to tighten them up and tie them up. But after a little while, they sag as well. So to prevent organ prolapse, they just started putting this mesh in, as in that diagram. You can see like a little slingshot just to hold things up, and then they tie it up to the front of your abdominal wall. Right? So this surgical mesh, is it a medical device? Yeah, should be pretty straightforward. It's very, very much a medical device. So we're talking about reporting. When we talked about risk management and when we talked about the life cycle of a medical device, you have to have some sort of mechanism in place. So you're responsible as a manufacturer and a designer to have something in place to capture anything that fails. So if someone has a bad reaction to your device, or if your device stops working, let me tell you about the defibrillators who didn't defibrillate. And there was a pacemaker they used to just randomly zap people that Medtronic had to withdraw from the market. And then there was a pacemaker that didn't zap people when they were supposed to, and people died from heart attacks that were avoidable. Anyhow, long story short, we'll talk more about those next time. But today, we are talking about what are our post-market requirements that we have to do as a manufacturer. And as we said, I have to keep track of where my devices are going. I have to be able to recall a device if I had to. I have to be able to have something in place, maybe even if it's just a spreadsheet, to capture and collate all the data for post-market monitoring requirements that people report to us, that the sales rep reports to you, that the surgeon reports to you. On top of that, twice a year you have to submit a report to the TGA with your post-market data analysis. All right. So, but we know that reporting is often skewed. So when it comes to overall reporting to the TGA, it's skewed towards negative outcomes and much newer devices, because they're the ones that doctors pay attention to and patients tend to report more. All right. If it's same old, a device that you've been using for 10 years, unless it's a really, really extreme case of failure, most people tend to like it's normalized, so they don't necessarily report it. And sometimes it's really, like with the pelvic mesh example, it can be really hard to distinguish between failure, a side effect, poor surgical method, or a poor outcome. So you could just be unlucky where you have a weaker abdominal wall or muscle weakness, or you end up with muscular atrophy or with tissue adhesions within your pelvis, which can cause pain. Also, you don't know if the pelvic pain that you're experiencing, these procedures were done on women. Women often experience pain in that region for variety of other reasons, not just period pain. We're talking about, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, just generalized pelvic pain. It can be STIs, it can be anything. There's chronic pain syndrome. Also, when they actually perform the surgery, they can often cut certain nerves in that area, which could result in hypersensitivity in certain parts of the pelvis. Okay, so there were these urogenital meshes that people use since, I think the first version of it came out in 1996. So they've used this particular mesh that I'm talking about for the last 10 years. And there have been lots of reports of stuff going wrong, but as I said, a lot of the time it was put down to, oh, the surgery wasn't done correctly, or, oh, that woman's just complaining about pain. So a lot of the complaints weren't taken seriously, and the patients would complain to their surgeon, but they wouldn't complain to the TGA because most of the time they had no idea what the surgeon did or what sort of device they put in. They had no idea that he actually left anything inside. So that's kind of scary. All right, so the mesh story, I thought that was hilarious. Someone wanted to demonstrate how dodgy the notified body system in Europe is, and I will admit that some notified bodies are more stringent than others, but they took a fruit net bag from the fruit as pictured, and they tried to see how far along the regulatory pathway they can get it to have it approved as a medical device. And it almost got approved. So they wrote an article about it, but that was dodgy. Yes, anyways, so back to our mesh story, is there were lots of issues reported about this particular device as far back as 10 years ago. So what used to happen is they'd use this device, however, you're using it in a high friction environment where muscles and organs slide all over each other. And if you can imagine putting a cheese grater in there and then sliding your organ over the top repeatedly as you walk, run, sit, whatever. After a while, a lot of these surgical meshes tended to puncture through the relevant organ. So it could puncture your bladder, some of them came out through the vaginal wall. So there were women that were reporting having pain on sexual intercourse, and it wasn't until their partner reported feeling something in there that they would examine and found that the mesh had actually gone through the vaginal wall, and that was one of the more common things that happened. Okay, so, and they would move within the pelvis. They would cause a lot of adhesions, and adhesions would make organs stick together. So you might end up with a part of bowel stuck to your uterus, which is also very unpleasant. Then you could end up with motility issues and that sort of stuff, lots and lots of pain. So chronic pain when you're sitting, chronic pain when you're walking. And the most terrifying part is that a lot of these women were told that it was all in their head. By their surgeon, by their GP, by the psychologists that were treating them. Right. So anyways, I think the first lawsuit was in the USA, but nobody was concerned about that because someone's always suing someone else in the US. And then the UK, there was a couple of class action suits. And we're still using these products in Australia. And then New Zealand and Scotland initiated a voluntary review of that particular mesh. And then finally in 2017, it's 2 years after everyone else, a bunch of patients got together and decided to sue Johnson & Johnson because of the surgical mesh and issues connected with it. And as soon as they initiated the lawsuit and the media got wind of it, the Federal Court of Australia commenced a review into the mesh, and they moved it from market within 2 weeks, I think. But by then a lot of damage had been done. So they were banned in Australia a few months later, and there was so much about it in the media, and there were so many complaints and outrage that the government actually initiated a Senate review into the whole fiasco to try and figure out what happened and how can we prevent it from happening. And I remember seeing this article, and I think it's actually true. We're better at tracking parts in our car than we are at tracking parts in our body with the current system in place. So if something goes with your car, if they have to have recall, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. They have a good idea of exactly what parts are in your vehicle. However, some of these surgeons did not, because there wasn't a strict mechanism in place. So surgeons kept notes, but they did not necessarily record the serial number of the device that they used. They did not record where exactly in the pelvis they put it or how much of it. Sometimes they cut it in half and do all kinds of weird stuff with it, depending on this procedure that they had to do. And a lot of the time, the notes weren't kept past the 5-year mark. So it used to be you used to only have to keep notes for 5 years, then 7 years, then 10 years, and now I think it's up to 30 years that we have to keep notes for in electronic format. Anyway, so a lot of this information was lost, and a lot of patients weren't told that they were actually, that they were told they had a procedure, but they weren't told that they had a device put in. Right. So the community affairs, so the government committee found that thousands of Australian women were actually affected. And it said we needed to set up a national register to track all implants. We need better education for doctors and patients on recognizing and reporting adverse outcomes. We need to remove some of these devices, except that's not always possible. And sometimes removing them can cause a lot more damage than leaving them in there. They also offered a lot more counseling. And finally, mandatory reporting of adverse events by medical practitioners. Because up until then, mandatory reporting only applied to the company and not necessarily to the medical practitioner. The medical practitioner had voluntary reporting, and we all have voluntary reporting if we want to. All right, I better speed up. So today we're going to talk about what is post-market monitoring, why is it important, what tools do we have, and what are recall actions. All right. So you might see here, it's probably not clear. So you've got the customer feedback or events component, you have the complaints, then you have reportable complaints, and then we have action at the very, very bottom of that cone. All right, so these beautiful TGA slides, which I like. So what is post-market monitoring? The continuous monitoring and evaluation of the safety and efficacy and performance of all therapeutic goods that are currently on the market. So this is all the post-market stuff. And the TGA regulates therapeutic goods through the entire life cycle. So we looked at all the pre-market stuff, but even after it's on the market, they still look at evidence, they look at the register, they monitor stuff. So it's if a medical device gets recalled in another country, often we will keep track of that and follow suit. We might initiate a review of that same device if it's known to have been found to cause harm elsewhere. So they actually look at what happens overseas to the same devices. As I said, we import most of our devices, so lots of big international companies. Because what used to happen is a device would get recalled in one country, but they'd still keep selling it and using it and getting the maximum mileage out of a different country, because that regulation might be slower to kick in. All right, so any changes to product information, safety alerts and recalls get assessed, and they do enforce compliance. So what is the ultimate goal? Is to continually ensure the safety of medical devices along with everything else. So we want to keep that reasonable risk-benefit profile. We want to keep it the same, and if anything changes, like the stats at the end of your review, then that risk-benefit ratio might not be tipping in your favor any longer. So the benefit is safety for patients, protection of public health for authorities, so no more pelvic mesh scandals, and then the manufacturers actually get to improve their products from the feedback that they get. So this is like a classic case of effectiveness versus efficacy. Who remembers what the difference was? So efficacy is the way something performs in a perfect environment, such as a clinical trial, and effectiveness is what happens when you start using it in the real world with real patients. just to illustrate why it's important, so this is using a medicine as an example. Who here has heard of Vioxx? It was a COX-2 inhibitor, and it was used for osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, and it was pretty good. It actually worked really well for osteo. The problem was, eventually, it kind of gave people heart attacks. So it increases your risk of dying from a heart attack by like 10%, I think. Let's have a look. One cardiovascular event for each 65 patients who took Vioxx for at least 18 months. So yes, they had to withdraw that from the market because the benefits did not outweigh the harm. So this was an unforeseen side effect. And because, surprise, they didn't run their trials past the 18-month mark. So this sort of, this only became evident after you were taking this medicine long term. So for more than a year. Okay. So the tools available for post-market monitoring, we have the standard risk management plans, which we've talked about in lectures. We did some of that in the workshop yesterday, and we're going to do some of that today. So your risk management plan, where you identify the hazard, and the hazard then tells you what the risk is, and then you can analyze the risk to see if you can reduce it as much as possible. All right, so your risk management plan will have something in place to deal with that risk. Then we have adverse event reporting and pharmacovigilance. Basically the audits, so you get audited. And then, as I was saying, environmental scanning. So we're looking at confidential advice from other regulators, a review of medical literature, regulatory news, media, and other sources. So people do Google stuff all the time. If you see a new device that you've never seen before, you will Google the hell out of it. You'll look at the latest clinical studies, you will look at the latest animal studies and see what's up. So you never take what the manufacturer tells you for granted, right? And people will sometimes only select the good studies, and they won't mention the not so great studies. So even though they're not supposed to do that, you might find if you Google that particular compound, the first 10 studies are all bad, 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 and then it starts to say, oh, it might have slight effectiveness in this. So it's worth doing. So again, we do risk-benefit assessments of products at a population level this time, all right? So the benefit of taking a medicine or using the device should be greater than the possible adverse events for the population. So if you have that like 1 in a million, there's no risk. Nothing's going to be risk-free. You might have one outlier where someone dies horribly from using your device, but everyone else is fine. Do you then withdraw that device from market? Probably not. But if you say we have severe harm and disability but no death for like, I don't know, 20 people or 2% of people that use this device, then do you withdraw it from market? Yeah, you have a good think about it. You redo that risk-benefit assessment and you say to them, can I see your long-term projections, please? And they actually have to supply this data to you. All right, so higher levels of risk may be acceptable for a product used to treat a terminal illness. As we were saying before, if that kid's gonna die, you're gonna give him the heart valve even though you haven't had a chance to like vet it properly, because it's either that or death, in which case the risk is acceptable, but not for a common or minor complaint. The definition of an adverse event. So for both medicines, biologicals, and medical devices, an event that resulted in or could have resulted in serious injury, illness, or death. So the key word here is a near miss. So something that could have happened is still considered to be an adverse event. So you might, get your artificial heart, you have a look at it and you're like, oh, it's gone a bit brown around the edges, I'm not going to use this, chuck it at the bin. That is still an adverse event and you need to report it. Right, that's an extreme case, but you get the idea. So anything that's unusual that you're not sure about, even if you, let's say you press a button and all of a sudden instead of getting nice clear dialysis fluid, you end up with bubbles going through the tubing, but you stop it immediately, you take it out of the patient's arm and it never actually made it to the patient. that's still a near miss, right? Actually, that's a pretty severe one, but I know of this happening. One of the cartridges, that the film would come undone and it would introduce bubbles into the circulation. So I'm like, yeah, and they noticed the bubbles and they would just like flush them out and keep using the device. All right, kind of scary. I'm not going to name and shame, but that means that the instructions for use were not, and the warning systems did not adequately cover that possibility, and that should have been reported as quite a serious adverse event. All right, so medical device adverse event can also be associated with the use or misuse of a medical device. Who knows about the fentanyl? No, it's not the coffee, it's just me. Fentanyl patches. People would get the pain patches, so they were like, instead of giving people drug, they would give them the patch, and they would soak it in warm water and then inject themselves with it. So, yes, and I think a lot of those got taken off the market now. They're only used in hospitals where it can be monitored. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I haven't looked it up, but I remember it was a big issue at the time. So, getting the device to operate. The need for repeated repairs. If you're constantly calling a company about your reusable device not working appropriately, or your x-ray or whatever, then there's an issue. Difficulty of use or difficulty with cleaning after use. So that's another one that we mentioned in the workshop yesterday. We're going to talk about in the workshop today. How are you going to clean your device? Okay, so your role as a health professional, your role as a consumer, your role as a designer. If you see something that doesn't add up, even if you're not sure about it, you have a responsibility to report it. And if there's an online thing at the TGA where you can do it, or you can give them a call. So, and we'll talk about what isn't notifiable with it. All right, so they have this incident report investigation scheme called IRIS, and you can sign up for the IRIS newsletter on the TGA website, and then they'll send you a list of all the medicines and devices that either have an alert or have been recalled every week. After a while, it gets a bit tedious. All right, so what is the risk assessment? What is the investigation? What regulatory action is needed? I just really like this diagram because the bottom sort of tells you what the five possible outcomes are. So you can have a recall, you can have a safety alert, you can have a report, and you can actually cancel or suspend, so this is like involuntarily cancel or suspend their product. And you can have other action. Most of the time, if you said to them, hey, your stuff's being reviewed and we found all these issues, please send us more information. Rather than doing that, they're going to voluntarily take their product off the market because they know they don't have the data, or because they generally know they've had an issue for months before you actually initiate the investigation, which is so dodgy. That bit there that's covered up, see, maybe not all the TGA slides are beautiful. It should say false. So the TGA is particularly interested in serious or unexpected reactions to medicine. So serious and unexpected being key word here. And then faults or problems with medical devices that have resulted or could have resulted in adverse events. It's most important to report them, especially with unexpected reactions to medicines. Now, you're always going to have like the one weird allergic reaction to something, but it is important to record it because there's a difference between 1 and 10, right? And all of these reactions that we're reporting are distinct from well-known side effects. So stuff that's listed in the booklet, you probably, it's an accepted and a well-known established side effect of taking that medication, such as you say, like, you take a painkiller and you start to feel a bit woozy and sleepy. Or, you've taken some antibiotics and all of a sudden you have a stomachache and diarrhea. So who currently reports adverse events? With medicine, the majority is reported by industry. Then we have state and health departments. Then we have hospitals. And if you have a look, GPs is only 6%, consumers is only 6%. So you are about as likely as your GP to notify the TGA of an adverse event. And think about how frequently you do that. Community pharmacists is another one, which I think is like a really big missed opportunity, because they're often at the forefront of what happens, but they don't get paid enough to do that. It's a lot of time to make a report for them, and I don't know why they don't do it more frequently. I think there's not a lot of education that happens, and with medical devices, it is sponsors because they're required to do it. Again, we have hospital supply administration, and if you look at that 1 blue percent, engineers and technicians, which might be you guys one day. So I actually think engineers and technicians are a lot better placed than other people to do that. So for example, your next job, your first job out of uni for a lot of biomedical engineers is you might go and do all the servicing for the large medical equipment at a hospital. So that's like a standard off the rank first job. And often you just go through the motions. You take it apart, you clean the machine, you service it, you put it back together, you tick off some checklists, sign your name, and off you go. If you notice some discoloration with the surface of it, if you notice anything that isn't right, you should actually be reporting that and not just cleaning it up and putting it back together. But again, when some of these people get trained, they don't get told to do that. They get told to just finish their job in a short amount of time as possible. All right? So I think the education programs are somewhat lacking. Okay. So we're back to risk management plans. I know I've done these to death, but it identifies a lot of issues that may not have been discovered during the clinical trial. So we talked about some of the issues of doing clinical trials, the duration of the clinical trial, how hard it is for a medical device. So by having a risk management plan in place, you can mitigate some of this. So it's a living document that covered the entire life cycle of the product and informed the periodic safety update reports. So as I was saying, the first thing that you're going to get audited is your risk management plan and your risk management system. And I've gone on audits and it hasn't been updated in like years. So it means that they're not doing this properly. So key elements of risk management plan is safety specification. So you have your safety profile, and are you regularly reviewing and updating it, including known and potential safety concerns. Then you have pharmacovigilance activities and risk minimization activities. All right, so safety signals. So safety signals isn't what happens, it's what we do in response to those, to the event. So information collected from one or more sources that show potentially causal relationship between a product and an adverse event. And there's 3 steps in the signals investigations process. I don't know why they use that terminology, but they do. So we detect a signal. So we review the adverse event report, the internal monitoring activities and report. So they get, as I was saying before, you get all these red flags, right? So maybe the audit brought up one red flag saying, oh, the risk management system is not up to date and hasn't been reviewed in a while. Maybe the person doing the research, which is the desktop assessment, looked at their stuff and said, oh, their post-market numbers look a bit dodgy. So they sent an email to the post-marketing team saying, can you please review this? Maybe someone rang up and said, oh, look, I've been using this product for like, 2 years in a row, and now all of a sudden it tastes different, it smells different, it feels different. I don't know what's wrong with it, but I just thought I'd let you know. All right, so published literature. Maybe someone did a clinical study on this, some student did a clinical study on this and found that in that particular form it killed 30% of the animals that they used. I don't know, but it happens. All right, so assessing signals is you look at everything together as a whole. You look at the nature of the signals, you look at the magnitude of the signals, and you look at the health significance, both on one-on-one and population health level. So what is the impact of the signal on the overall risk benefit of the product? So lots of different factors. Is it a serious event in a few patients or a moderate adverse event in large amounts of patients? So what we were talking about before. And there's a nice little equation to try and work out which one apply, which one's more significant. And if you're not sure, you give it to the committee and they do that work for you. That's their job. So they have committees for everything at the TGA. So responding to signals, finally. So you can communicate with the consumer, health professionals, and industry regarding the problem. They can either change the product label, they can recall the goods for sale or for correction. They usually just slap a sticker over the top, like a warning sticker, or it depends on what the problem was. So if it's a minor issue, they might do nothing. They might just issue a release on their website. They might, as I said, put a sticker on the outside of the packaging. Then they might recall the goods from sale and repackage them, which is a pain when you have like a warehouse full of 40,000 heart valves or whatever it is. So then we, the TGA, can change the conditions of your registration. So it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. They might say you can only sell this device for use in this particular condition. You no longer have the right to sell it for this other condition. So they can change your approved indications for use while they're investigating, or if there's something associated with that condition, you haven't done things to their satisfaction. So if they've made you aware of this problem, but you sort of said, oh, we're just going to do extra monitoring, they can say, well, no, we're not happy with that, so we're just going to change your certificate. And they can finally take the extraordinary step of suspending or canceling your product. So when the TGA did a review of all the pregnancy sticks, I think 60% of the brands all of a sudden became unavailable because they found that they weren't advertised, so they might have advertised them as 99.997% accurate, but when the TGA tested them, they were as low as 95% accurate. So it might not sound like a big deal to you guys, but when we're talking about pregnancy, it needs to be pretty accurate and needs to be as advertised. So a lot of them withdrew their pregnancy tests, and only 1 or 2 came back on the market since this was like a year ago, I think. And again, you can sign up for this email and get these wonderful alerts and recalls about drugs you've never heard of. All right, so post-market regulatory controls is notify the manufacturer to take appropriate actions such as product correction, sales restriction till the correction is verified, or market withdrawal. You can perform audit, inspection, or you can even do sample testing. You can say to them, can you please send me 30 of your random products, or you can go down to the local pharmacy and pick 30 off the shelf. The TGA actually does have labs, and they do product testing in their labs. They can test them, and then if they find that they're not accurate, then you're kind of in trouble. You can inform targeted healthcare providers. So if this is a device that's specifically used for one type of surgery, you can actually inform all the surgeons registered to perform that type of procedure. And usually the Royal Australasian, their member body will notify them as well. So you can escalate safety monitoring of the product or same type of product. So if one of your products has had an issue, chances are either your predicate or the one that came after might have a similar issue, so you might review those as well. All right, so I might need to speed this up. So this is a case study where one single report can make a difference. Now, I don't know, you guys might think this is a big deal, you might think it's not, but someone, I think this was just one surgeon, reported that an epidural catheter, which is normally clear, he pulled it out, it was yellow when he looked at it. So he put it aside and grabbed a new one and used the new one, but he actually said, look, I don't know why it was yellow, it was crusty yellow, please find out what's wrong with it. So it was sent to the TGA tested it and found that it was cytotoxic. Right, you guys learned about cytotoxicity in our previous workshop? Okay, anyways. So, however, when they tested a bunch of samples of the same catheter, they found that even the clear ones were cytotoxic. Now, no one ever reported an issue with cytotoxicity. However, they investigated it further and found that one of the compounds that they used to soften the plastic was a known neurotoxin. So, and they've been using it for 30 years with no reports. However, because of that, it was recalled worldwide because the benefits no longer outweigh the risks. So they could have used that catheter on a neonatal patient, you don't know. they have their own catheters, but what I'm saying is there's the risk there that even though nothing ever happened, something could have happened, and you cannot, if you have a known registered neurotoxin, which might have a very low LD50, you do not want to be putting it in people's spines. All right. Okay. So sometimes it takes more than one report. Sometimes it only takes one. Sometimes it can take a handful of reports. I remember this, but this actually commonly happens. I don't know if you guys ever bodybuild. A lot of those bodybuilders start doing all the protein shakes and stuff, and occasionally they end up with liver failure and renal failure, but mainly like needing a new liver. So there was a drug, which one was that one? I'm trying to remember the actual name. It's another anti-inflammatory, but this one was closer to the Nurofen family than it was to the NSAIDs. And as I said, it worked really well for osteoarthritis, because that's what they tested it on. I feel bad for people with osteoarthritis. All of their drugs keep getting taken off the market. But yeah, they found that after a while that there was 2 fatalities, so people just ended up with budgie livers. So 2 of them were on liver transplants, some of them were on the waiting list, some of them had really severe jaundice and hepatitis. So it caused inflammation of the liver when it was processed. And they found that the rate of severe liver injury appeared to be greater than for other similar medicines, and then they canceled the registration, so that was an involuntary cancellation. And it wasn't just that one brand, they actually canceled all of the products that contained that ingredient in Australia. Okay, because they deemed it to be an imminent risk of death, serious illness, or serious injury, which is one of the categories. All right, so there's recall actions. So recall is a permanent removal of an affected therapeutic goods from supply or use on the market. Then we have recall for product correction, where they repair, modify, adjust, or relabel a therapeutic good. So a common one might be where it doesn't have to be bad, it can be good. Sometimes they extend the shelf life of the product, and then they recall all their devices that they have, and they relabel them with the extended shelf life. And it could be a hazard alert. Information issued to health professionals about issues or deficiencies relating to an implanted medical device or biological product. So this happened with the meshes because you couldn't exactly take them out. Right, so even though they recalled the device, there had to be a hazard. Initially, it was a hazard alert that was issued. Then it was a recall, but a lot of the time, if something's been used, you issue both of them together. Okay. They have an inspection program. They try to educate sponsors of their pharmacovigilance, not today, of their requirements. They verify the compliance with existing requirements. They work with sponsors to ensure systems are collecting current information on the safety and efficacy of their medicines. I like this slide because it tells you who all the big players are and what they can do and what their responsibilities are. So you have the health authority, you have the manufacturers, you have the health facilities, and so on. I found this and I thought it was really cool because it's got all the different GLP, GTP, so there's good tissue practice, good clinical practice on the side. I just thought it was a really nice summary. And then on the right hand side in the red, you have the adverse device reaction. So that's all the post-market surveillance stuff in red. So safety, surveillance, and alerts. Good distribution practice, we haven't covered that, don't worry about it. And consumer health education and awareness. Okay, so just as an introduction to next lecture, sorry, wall of text, but medical device companies always argue that they're totally different from medicines and should be treated differently. And that is actually true to a point. So we know that the criteria for approving almost all new drugs states that you have at least one randomized control trial in human test patients, has to demonstrate safety and efficacy throughout the world, and if you look at that compared to the standard for devices, because you can't do that, obviously the standard is actually lower. So in the US, drug makers show substantial evidence for medicines. However, they only have to show reasonable assurance for devices. And sometimes you can get through without even having that. So this is mainly FDA stuff, but I think since 2017, Trump announced that he was deregulating that entire sector. So it's like a free-for-all over there. So they started getting a lot more devices through, and there was a big backlog. So it's kind of scary. We're going to see what happens in 2 years. Anyhow, so regulators allow major and sometimes significant changes of devices under the 510K pathway. I don't know if you guys know about that one. So it says if there's something that's substantially similar to what I want to put on the market already on the market, I should be allowed to like bypass most of the assessment and check mine on there. So it's similar to having a predicate device, but without a lot of the restrictions that the TGA puts in on what constitutes a predicate. So sometimes when you've had a series of predicates, the device that you end up with at the end has no resemblance to the device that you started with, right? And they're substantially different. And same when you're looking at, that's a difficulty with like custom-made devices. If you're making small adjustments and small changes as you get along, they can add together to result in a big failure, right? Ah yes, so here we go. After a chain of these equivalence-based approvals, a new device scarcely resembles the original version. So there's issues. So what do you guys think exactly happened with the mesh? I probably like gave it away, but what were the major failures there? Was it vigilance? Was it reporting? Was it poor surgical procedure? Was it a combination of everything? Yeah, reporting is a big one. But keep in mind, some of these did get reported. So this isn't new. Like the TGA has been getting notifications about this for a couple of years now. So yes, it was all of it together. So it just shows that you can have every known mechanism in place and you can still have substantial device failure. And we're going to go through some other really cool ones, not tomorrow, on Monday. So we're going to talk about registries on Mondays and why we actually need registries. So if they had a registry for surgical meshes, they would have probably picked this up years ago. So a registry looks into this stuff in a lot more detail, and they look at trends specifically. They look at types of, if it was a surgical mesh, but like the types of knees and that sort of stuff. So we'll talk about that next time, but what I'm saying is you can always have extra stuff in place that costs extra money. All right, any questions? So I want you guys to remember what the pharmacovigilance program is. I want you to have a think about safety and risk. I want you to think about, oh, that was a part of the risk lecture anyways. If you have a severe event in one patient versus a mild to moderate event in a whole group of patients. What else? And keep in mind that devices are not the same as medicines. So biologicals align with medicines a lot more closely. So you can actually use a lot of that data, but not for medicines. I mean, not for medical devices, my bad. So they are not the same, so know the differences. Cool. Now, if you guys are coming to the workshop this afternoon, if you could do the reading that's been put up online, that would be really great, because there's a lot of content to get through. Okay, thank you so much.